Hey there, gang. Hope everything's going well with you. This is going to be our first in several thousand video series of how we're going to learn about world history from this point going forward. I have shared with you a PDF of what your Cornell Note should look like. If you'll notice on the left side, you're going to have the main ideas. You take your notes on the right, and then down at the bottom will be a summary. And then you can do some sketch notes as practice and just kind of a way to work through it. I have broken down the week for you, which you should also have seen on the Google slide that has Monday through Friday for you. We're going to work 4 days and have a fun little assessment sort of day on Friday because they don't want me working you too hard with all the stuff you've got evidently going on in your life, which is absolutely nothing. So let's kind of pick up, since we're talking about new stuff, let's talk about where we were when we kind of left off. If you'll remember before we went on our vacation, spring break, and all that other stuff, we have carried ourselves through the course of world history from caveman, and we were just at the part where we were starting to talk about European exploration. We've come out of the Middle Ages, the fall of the Roman Empire, and all those kinds of things, and you've got Western Europe forming into what we're used to when we think about the times of exploration and things like that. You've got the whole countries in a way that we're used to seeing now. You've got Spain, you've got Portugal, you've got France, you've got England. Germany's not quite together yet. It's a whole bunch of small countries, principalities kind of working together. Italy isn't quite formed yet, but most of Western Europe is what we see. So we're going to talk about today something called absolutism, or an absolute monarchy. And this is going to be best exemplified by Louis XIV from France. So we're going to use him as our example of this. But absolutism is talking about an absolute monarch. And this is when a king or a queen is what we think of as a king or a queen. Somebody that has absolute control over the power within their state, their country. They control everything. They control the government and hold all the power. And why did they have that power? Something that they called divine right. Now, those are going to be your two words or two terms today to work on for your four-corner vocabulary: absolute monarch and divine right. Divine right is just what we've talked about before. Divine means heavenly. It means God has chosen these people to be the head of this country. And not only did they believe that, but their people that followed them came to believe that as well. You see feudalism kind of going away, the centralized power, and you start to see this power come together in one place, and that's going to be at the monarch of the particular country. And like I said, one of the best ones to think about for that is going to be Louis XIV. So where does he come from? Well, it's good to trace his family line to kind of understand what you're talking about. We've covered a pretty decent job with the Protestant Reformation. That's going to be an overriding issue and a conflict going on for hundreds of years in Europe. So this is under the main ideas section of Crown and Religion. You've got a guy by the name of Henry Navarre, or Henry of Navarre. And he is going to be a descendant of a medieval French king. And he is going to inherit the throne. And he is going to start what's called the Bourbon Dynasty. The crazy thing about him is that he was a Protestant, and then he gave up Protestantism and converted to Catholicism because there was a very strong belief that the King of France should be a Catholic. But when he did that, he issued what's called the Edict of Nantes, which is a governmental declaration of religious tolerance. We have to tolerate those Protestants in France, and they were called Huguenots. That was their special name that they were given, was Huguenots, were the French Protestants. And this went over so well with the Catholics, who were really looking forward to leaning on these people, that they actually stabbed Henry to death. So he's gone and out of the way, and religious intolerance is kind of going to kick up into a new height, because his son is going to take over, and his son is going to be Louis XIII. and he is a weak king, but he puts in a very strong group around him, most specifically a guy by the name of Cardinal Richelieu. And Cardinal Richelieu is the highest ranking member in France of the Roman Catholic Church. That's why he's a cardinal. That's one of their highest people. And he really uses his extra power of basically having the power of the church and the government as the prime or main minister of the king to really go against the Huguenots. What he does is typically these people would live together in villages, towns, and cities, would be mostly one or the other. Well, he got some laws passed to do things where Huguenots were not allowed to build walls around their city, so they wouldn't be able to protect themselves. And not only did he go after the Huguenots, but he went after the noble class as well, and did the same sorts of things to them. If they had a fortified castle that they may have lived in or their family may have lived in for hundreds of years, he would actually make them take down their castles and move on to estates, once again so they could not protect themselves from the power of the government, which he was using as a church slash governmental power, because he's pushing the intertwined power of the Roman Catholic Church and the French crown at the same time. So how are the people reacting to this? Well, one of the things that you can kind of tell about a civilization and a society is what kind of art is being made at that time, and how writers and thinkers are approaching that kind of time. And there were a couple of different folks that came around. Michel de Montaigne is one who developed a kind of a new form of literature called the essay, which you can thank him for that. You can thank the Muslims for algebra. You can thank de Montaigne for the essay. And he also started pushing this idea that you can't know everything, and that in fact nothing is ever 100% certain, and that's known as skepticism. We still use the term skeptic today. I'm skeptical that that's going to happen, meaning you're disbelieving it because you don't trust that anything can be 100% known. So what you're starting to see is you're starting to see some older beliefs start to be replaced by newer beliefs. Another guy that you may or may not have heard of is Rene Descartes. He was a mathematician, but he was also a philosopher, and he comes up with actually the scientific method is one of the main things that he invented, but he really felt like you could use observation and reason to figure things out, and that's basically what he does. So Louis XIV comes to power. His rise to power is pretty crazy. He inherits the throne when he's 4 years old, so obviously he can't rule. So he has another cardinal that's helping him by the name of Mazarin, who is basically the ruler of France. And Louis XIV is just a little kid. And what happens is the Cardinal Mazarin gets kind of a little too uppity and full of himself and starts to try to do the same sorts of things Richelieu was doing, but the nobles actually rebel. And they come after the king, who's at this time 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So they're coming after him as he is a young man, as a boy. And that's how he grows up in this kind of cauldron of somebody constantly being after you and trying to destroy you and kill you so that they can kind of take back the power for themselves. The nobles fail. And eventually Louis XIV kind of comes of age and starts to take over himself. And what he does is he starts to put things in place to weaken the nobles' authority even more. He basically kicks them out of his councils that speak to him and give him advice on things. He actually increases the power of government agents to go collect taxes and administer justice and do stuff like that. He actually starts working on an economy, trying to get France moving forward with an idea of mercantilism, which is a strong central government and then colonies out in there providing the raw materials, and you turn those raw materials into finished goods and stuff like that. And so colonies were kind of a big deal. And he has an idea that is how France is going to move forward. The problem is he's got a minister of finance, a guy who is in charge of all this kind of stuff. Once that guy dies, everything falls apart. And then you see Louis really make a move to start to consolidate his power. He cancels the Edict of Nantes, which has given a lot of protections to the Huguenots, and so a lot of them leave. You actually see a huge kind of exodus of French Protestants from France at that time. They go to England. A lot of them come to the United States. The Charleston area is full of people with strange sounding Frenchish last names because they're descendants of these Huguenots. But you can't fault Louis XIV, because what he does is proves his point that he becomes the center of everything. This is under the section known as the Sun King, as in I am the sun and everything else revolves around me. He completely controls the lives of the nobles. He forces them to give up their own estates and move to this new palace that he has built called Versailles. And Versailles is symbolic of everything that Louis is trying to do. Make himself the center of everyone in France's life. And he uses that to weaken the power of the nobles, because now they can't be spread all over France where he can't keep an eye on them. Now they have to be all under one roof where he can keep an eye on them at the time. And he also makes where he is the fountain of all power. And so the closer you were to him and the more you sucked up to him, the better off you were. So he did all these kind of crazy things, like he invented a way of life that you had to live at Versailles, how you dressed, how you ate, how the table was set, how your manners, and he gave everybody special jobs that he liked that were closer to him, that gave them more power. But he wasn't a great ruler, because his mind, he was it. He was everything. His most famous statement was, "L'État c'est moi." I am the state. I am France. Whatever I say goes. One of the things that he said was, hey, let's invade the Netherlands, which is a country north and east of France. And it just didn't work. They won a couple battles, but he basically expended a whole lot of energy and a lot of lives and spent a whole lot of money to gain just like a couple square miles of territory. So then he turns the other direction and he goes to try to take over Spain in a way. And what he does is he puts his grandson on the throne in Spain after their king had died without an heir. People were afraid of that. The power of the Spanish and the power of the French together starts to become an issue. So he ends up going to war, because the rest of Europe is not real happy about that. So eventually, after an incredibly long life, he actually dies. He starts to see towards the end that he's made mistakes and that the people are suffering because of him. I've heard all sorts of numbers about Versailles, but there's talk that in modern terms that basically in the building of that ginormous palace, that basically $1 in every $4 that France had at that time went to the Palace of Versailles. 25% of any bit of money they were making was going to the building of Versailles. So eventually he does die. And then things go into turmoil after he dies as well, because the next leader is not going to be nearly as strong. France has become a military power, but they're incredibly in debt. A lot of art has been created during his time because things were fairly stable. But what we're going to see when we kick into tomorrow's stuff is that the money spent and the tax burdens on the people are going to be what leads to what we know as the French Revolution. So I hope that's enough to kind of keep you going on that. Like I said, go ahead and fill out Cornell notes and things as you get them. Then do some sketch notes. And then we're going to work through some Four Corners vocabulary on the two that I share with you. And then once you get done with all that stuff, circle back around, summarize at the bottom of your Cornell notes to make sure that you're actually getting it. And then answer the few review questions, and you're done for the day. All right, take care.